My story starts basically when I was born. Um, yeah, that way too. It really has to do with me and my mom. And basically, when I was little, we were inseparable. She was a stay-at-home mom most of the time. I remember going to gymboree classes with her. One of my earliest memories is taking the subway with her. She was always there with snacks if I was hungry. She was always there to listen to me ponder these philosophical questions like women don't die. I used to believe that women didn't die. Still kind of do. And we were really, I mean, to me, she was just, my protector, my savior. She was kind of my world. And I would try to do things to please her, to kind of cement our bond and make sure that it sort of didn't go anywhere. And I kind of, I was kind of a sensitive kid, and I had a sense that she wanted sort of creativity in her life. She would sort of draw and paint sometimes when, I could kind of give her a break. And I kind of decided that she might want a ballerina for a daughter when I was about 6, because what mom doesn't want a ballerina for a daughter? And they market it really, really well. And I went to her and I said, well, I'd really like ballet lessons. And we made that kind of work, but it was something that I was doing for her. And I was kind of aware at the time that it was something I was doing for her. So if we fast forward now to when I was around 10, I was starting to get bullied at school when I was 10, and this was before bullying had become the national conversation that it is now. It was still very much like blame the victim, like I would kind of, occasionally I would show up at my vice principal's office with bruises, and she'd be like, well, what did you do? So that was where that conversation was at that point. And my mom really went to bat for me, like, every time. She went to so many meetings with administrators, principals, vice principals, and was just really my defender. And then when I was 12, I wrote an exam for a school just down the road, actually, called the University of Toronto Schools, which is for kids who are kind of more academically inclined. And when I got in, my mom was just the happiest that I'd ever seen her. I mean, she was just delighted beyond delight. And I thought, wow, I've really, I've made her really happy. I've done something for myself, but I've also made her really happy. And I think that the idea was, oh, okay, so this school is like for kids who are like you, and, the bullying's going to stop now. That's not what happened. Unfortunately, it kind of continued, and the first year that I was there, it just sort of started up again. And basically, at the end of the year, there was this sort of meeting that the administration had with my parents, and it was kind of messy and awful, and they basically told my parents that the school wasn't working out for me, like I wasn't fitting in there, so if I couldn't learn to fit in somehow, I was going to have to leave. So I was basically threatened with expulsion for being bullied, which was problematic. So I was having some issues with this, and I remember this is sort of where it gets a little bit difficult, was where my mom came home from this meeting with the school, and I remember I was really nervous. I was just terrified the whole time they were at this meeting, because it was sort of like my fate was hanging in the balance. And I remember she came home and she sort of stormed into the kitchen, and she was banging dishes around in the sink, and she sort of, and I was like, well, what happened at the meeting? And she kind of stopped with the dishes, and she looked out the window that was above the sink, and she said, all this time I thought that the other kids were the problem, but now I'm starting to think that maybe it's you that's the problem, and what am I supposed to do about that? And that was my big moment of loss. Like, that was, like, it's hard to describe what that was. It was just this incredible, this person who'd always defended me, that I'd always looked to, had basically left me on my own. And I remember years later writing about it, and I wrote something like, one of me was born in that moment, one of me was born into self-hatred, into a womb full of knife blades, a biological Iron Maiden. And that was, it's hard to sort of remember the resonance of that, but that was how it felt at the time. That was the big moment of loss in the story. And I kind of stopped talking to her for a while. I really for about 2 years, we lived in the same house. We, sort of had our lives living in parallel, but really all I said to her was, pass the salt, please, for about 2 years. And then things started to get better. I had this bad haircut that grew out. I got contact lenses. I started, how, you're really awkward. You go through that awkward phase and then it sort of starts to end and it's like the light at the end of the tunnel. And I started to come out of it a bit, and I started to make a couple of friends, and, so things were getting a little bit better. So I started to talk to her a little bit. Not a lot, but a little bit. And really that was the beginning of the rapprochement process that has been kind of the story of how I grew up, and kind of learning to see my mother as an adult, an independent person, independent of me, and really understanding that she's more than just my mom. So what happened after that? What happened after the... It was a little bit like, I think it's a process that's ongoing, and it's a little bit like, the tectonic plate theory about like how the Earth's core is actually these plates that move, and there used to be like Pangea, and now we have all these continents because of tectonic drift. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Anyone? So that's kind of like what it's been like with me and her, I think, is it's just been this very gradual process of slowly drifting back toward each other after that break. And one of the things that, so I think what I lost is pretty clear. I lost this childhood version of my mother. But what I've ended up finding, it's taken a lot of time, but what I've found a couple of things, sort of forgiveness to a degree, and also empathy to a greater degree than I had before. And I think that, that last line of what she said to me, that, and what am I supposed to do about that? I hadn't thought about it, as a kid, I hadn't thought about it too much, but as an adult, I've thought about it quite a bit. And it seems like, that's a parent's perspective. That's kind of like, I'm a parent, I have this child who's having trouble, and I don't know what else to do about it. And it was almost like she was talking to herself, except that I was in the room. And it took me a long time to kind of learn to see it that way, that she was really kind of struggling with my situation herself, as much as I was struggling with it. So learning that, you can have empathy for your parents in that way, that parenting is really hard. Not that I'm a parent, but I hear it's really hard. I'm told, and learning that, and then I think from that you can more easily move to a bit of forgiveness. And I think forgiveness is, we talk about forgiveness like it's this definite thing that you sort of reach that point and you forgive and you're done. I don't really think that. I think it's more of like it's like an asymptote, like one of those lines that approaches the graph but never actually crosses the graph. Because I'm serious. I really do think this, because it's like there's some part of you that always remembers what it was like to be hurt or to be betrayed, but you get to the point where you can more or less kind of forgive something that happened that was difficult for you. And I think that, one of the real kind of blessings of this whole story is that there's been time for all of this to happen, because this has all taken a long time. Like, this has taken, I was 12 when this happened, and I'm not going to tell you how old I am now, but it's been years. And it's a kind of a slow build kind of a thing. And I think it can be really difficult when people don't get that chance. Like, there's this writer I really like, Cheryl Strayed. I'm sure some of you are familiar with her work. She wrote Wild, which became a movie. She wrote Tiny Beautiful Things. So one of the great tragedies of her life is that her mother died when Cheryl was in her early 20s, and she didn't really get that chance to have an adult relationship with her mother. So I think that those are the big things that, for what you lose, you gain something else. And although I sort of lost my mother for a while there, not in the final sense, but I lost her kind of in an emotional sense. For a while, it's things have had the time to evolve and change, and I've had the time to grow up, and she's had the time to grow up more, and I'm really grateful for that. And I can say now that I'm really proud to be her daughter. Thank you.